All right, everyone. This video is going to be dedicated to understanding the misrepresentation of money. Why is money misrepresented? In the previous video, we talked about that it's going to be titled MSDA Summary or MSDA Introduction. The misrepresentation of money is, well, in the last video, we talked about how we really don't really know, or no one really knows what money is. It's not defined, it's not published anywhere. We're all going along with some kind of common or a seemingly common notion of money, uh, and but we don't know if that's logically valid, and that's what the whole purpose of this project is to determine whether our notions of money are valid and to ensure that we all agree on some valid notion of money and the importance of that. So if you want to revisit that, you can go look at that video. But now we're going to talk about the fact that we do have a common notion of money, or it seems that in many cases we have a common notion of money, or at least there's a formalized common notion of money that it's implicit, if not explicit, in our money contracts and the way we think about money. So when we talk about money contracts, we're usually receiving money as if it's some kind of commodity, and then we're paying for its use over time or in terms of a percentage of its own value. And we also use money I give you money for this, or I give me so many dollars worth of that, so the money is a measure. So basically, these ideas or concepts conflate two ideas, and that is the idea of money as a measure of value. That's something that we can work on, and we can say, how do we measure value? And there's plenty of science that allows us to arrive at a common notion of what value is, which would be utility or worth or whatever, or desirability of something. And we can say that generally there's more desirability for this or that, or the desirability changes, and so the value or price of things can change, but we can measure that in a valid fashion, right? So we can measure value, and we can define money as a measure, and that's possible. But then if we're going to define money as a commodity, then we have to think differently, and we have to define it completely differently. And the two ways we would define money as a commodity versus money as a measure are what we call mutually exclusive. In other words, putting them together is a logical fallacy or mistake. In other words, it's a confusion. So if money is a measure, right, it cannot also be a tradable commodity or anything like a tradable commodity. It can't be subject to supply, demand, unit price, all that stuff. And if it's a tradable commodity, it can't be used as the standard measure of all things, right? It can't be also a measure. So there's a lot of subtle confusion there based on people's lack of technical rigor or understanding of basic concepts. It's very easy for people to believe that because something has measure, for example, my milk, I may have a liter of milk, so that bottle of milk or that instance of milk has a measure, but that doesn't mean that by virtue of having a particular measure in terms of some standard measure, that milk now is a measure too. You see, these are things that need to be worked out very carefully and very rigorously and very, very rationally. And that's what the whole idea of defining money and specifying it properly is about. But anyhow, the common misrepresentation of money is, if it can be summarized, is colloquially, when we say so many dollars worth of this or that, we're implying that money is a measure. And I think we all can relate to that. My guitar is worth more than your guitar, and has more value because mine costs $3,000 and your costs $300, right? But at the same time, we'll say, I'll give you $10 for that, So I'll give you $10 for your guitar, or for the strings for your guitar. Then you say to yourself, okay, so money now is an object that I trade for things, right? So we think this is the way, this is so natural to us, and it seems so natural to us that we think that that's, But have we asked the question, is that logically valid? Does that really make sense? Stop and think about that. I mean, if you were to think about a football league where suddenly it wasn't just a question about how many times somebody scored a goal, but it was also a question of the management of goals in general and whether a team was smart enough or to have figured out that they would have to borrow at least 5 goals because they were going to score, you know, they thought they were going to go score 5 or they could score 5. And if they didn't borrow 5 goals first, they only borrowed 3 and they scored 4, they would only be able to record 3. I mean, that would be insane. There would be, the football league would be, or the sports league would be a mess. So the idea of conflating the two is a serious mistake. And how can we sort of sense that idea? And I think one of the ways of thinking about it is that when you think about money, when you think of a measure, when you think of a measure, you say, measure is always of something, right? So as I have a kilo of flour, I have I have a meter of wood, So it's always of something. And so the annotation of 1 kilo or 1 meter, right, is a representation of some kind of value in some dimension, weight, or in terms of length in these cases, that measure is of something else. It's never of itself. I mean, you never have on the annotation itself, you don't even need a meter to write 1 meter, or you don't need something to weigh a kilo to write 1 kilo. So the annotation of that is independent of the thing that actually has that value, right? So when you trade money, right, you're getting something in exchange, right? You're giving money, but what does that really mean? Is the person receiving the dollar with the dollar sign receiving anything? No, they just get an annotation, right? So there is no equivalence between the dollar and the actual thing. If you give me a chicken and I give you $10, the $10 bill for that chicken, you're getting a piece of paper, an annotation for you're not getting anything of any value. So that's clear. So the two are different and mutually exclusive. There is a way that we could say, I give you $10, and what we're really saying is, technically speaking, is not giving them. What we're doing is subtracting. I have a certain amount of dollars either in my pocket and in physical currency, or I have it in my account. And the physical currency I have in my pocket, I had to subtract from my account to get anyhow. So basically, it all goes back to the account. And so I have an account. I have so many dollars. And when I give you, what I'm actually doing is subtracting from my account, and you're adding to yours. So the real functional, what's really going on is simply an adding and subtracting, right? In terms of, in this case, a chicken. You give me a chicken, maybe 10. So our accounts have modified in terms of the chicken. But what's actually moving around? We don't need to have physical bills. We can simply, as we do today, electronically, that when we use our credit cards, right, what we're actually doing is we're just modifying our accounts correspondingly. You give me the chicken, so the chicken's moved one way. So depending on which direction the chicken went from you to me, or from me to you, our accounts will be modified correspondingly, positive or minus. So there, money is functioning as a measure of the value of the chicken, but there is no need or any notion of limit to the amount of money or money being supplied. It actually happens if we both have 0 account balances and we decide to trade a chicken, right? Then suddenly the chicken will move from one to the other, and correspondingly, one's account will go up let's say $10 a chicken, and the other one will go down. So you have a minus and a positive, and they represent the movement of the chicken, the circulation of the chicken. So what's actually circulating are goods and services, and money is just measuring that value. But if we think that at the same time that money is actually an object of value in and of itself that we have to rent and we have to buy, or that that's subject to supply, a costly supply, then suddenly when we start to measure the value of money in terms of itself, which is the circular logic that this whole nightmare of a financial system we have is based on, then we fall into this trap because suddenly we're disvirtuing the measure. We're destroying the measure, right? So money is, in fact, misrepresented because throughout history, for different reasons, and we can discuss that in subsequent videos, but we've always had this conflation of these two ideas or concepts that don't fit together. And there's no reason in the world why we can't talk about money as a measure to measure value and keep track of goods and services moving around really effectively and have a stable measure that has absolutely next to no cost whatsoever. There's no problem in doing that. And there's absolutely no need or requirement for us to say, no, in order to do that, money must also be a tradable commodity that's subject to supply. We need central banks that are supply it to us and control and make sure that people don't have too much or too little. There's absolutely no need for that. The only reason we're doing it is because we've inherited an error from millennia. We've inherited this error, and we're trying to justify an error because we do it, rather than doing what we know we can justify. So the MSDA is about clearing that up, and if we clear up the misrepresentation of money, we're not going to harm anyone. It's not about a political movement where we're going to punish people and take from the rich and give to the poor. What we're going to do right now is clarify what the purpose of money is. And in doing so, we're going to make it easier for everyone to operate, to create wealth for themselves and their families, to live freer lives, with less control, with less government control, a true free market, and it's going to help everyone. In fact, I'm sure that Jeff Bezos, if he's free, because who knows how free he really is, given who he is and all the implications of his massive business. But if he's truly a free person, or in his heart of hearts, I'm sure that as a good engineer that he is, he's going to say, of course, if we can get rid of all this gratuitous financial risk, well, let's do so. Let's clarify the misrepresentation of money. Let's get that clear. Then I won't have to hold this problem of trying to manage my funds to make sure that my operation that everybody in the world wants, and now is becoming to need. then this wonderful thing of Amazon, of being able to work out the logistics of getting anything from point A to point B anywhere on the planet, which is a pretty neat thing, and I appreciate that tremendously from a technical point of view. How can we do that in a way that does no harm, where I don't have all these labor problems and everyone gets paid what they need to get paid and everyone benefits from the service? So it's a win-win for everyone. There's no reason for it's not a question of us and them. It's a question of all of us, saying let's just get rid of this incredibly encumbering problem. So that's what the misrepresentation of money is. So the take home is if money is a measure, it cannot also be a tradable commodity. And if it's a tradable commodity, it cannot also be a measure. If you want a formal mathematical proof of this, that's quite simple. But to summarize it in colloquial terms, let's just go quickly there to see that. Let me see. Let's just go here. Just quickly, where are we? Articles. Make it smaller. Articles. So, in colloquial terms, the value of any annotation C of the value of some object or thing A cannot have or be ascribed any independent value B other than 0, because otherwise the value of annotation C would no longer be of A, but rather of A plus B. So here's the proof, and it's right there. So basically, if we're going to value things in terms of money, then money is going to be dedicated to represent the value of other things. But if itself has value on its own, right, then it no longer can serve as a representation of value of other things, because you have to factor in the value of money itself plus the value of what's trying to represent. And that is totally unnecessary. There's absolutely no need for that. Okay, so this is the end of this second video, which talks about the misrepresentation of money. I hope you find it useful. Oh, just before going on, I just wanted to add this other thing, is that there is no expert consensus on money's definition. And if you come to this article at moneytransparency.com, core misrepresentation, if you look at that, you can read this and you'll see how the issue of money's definition is by no means been addressed or solved or agreed upon. So we don't really have any valid definition of money to guide us in trying to figure this out. But we do know that this is logically impossible, and we can prove that unequivocally. So now the whole idea of money markets or money being something subject to supply or control, that whole thing now literally has no foundation. So we can throw all of that out right now. We don't have to worry about it. And the IMF figures are all fudged. Not fudged because they're being dishonest with the figures they're using. It's fudged because conceptually the notion of money is wrong. And they have no definition of money that relates to any common reality. So we're using money to scare the willies out of people by playing around with its volume and the implications we have been conditioned to accept of using money, which scares us or affects us psychologically. But it has no real foundation to our common reality. And it should, and it has to have, for the reasons we've already discussed, particularly the legal ones, so that we have a common understanding of the contracts, and the scientific reason also, so that when we start doing calculations with money, we know what we're talking about, right? And we discussed that in the previous video too. So I hope you enjoyed that, and I look forward to the next video. All the best.